as well. But yeah, sorry, go ahead, do your intro.
Okay, so for me, I was actually pre-med and I graduated from University of Florida in 2016. And at the time, I was planning to apply into like medical school and stuff like that. And then I kind of had like, would you call it like an early quarter life crisis?
We both did, yes.
Yeah. And I'm just like, but why am I doing this? Like why am I applying or want to be a doctor pretty much? And I won't go into like the long details of it, but of course it's related to being an immigrant and my parents and me being super stubborn. It wasn't like a question of like, can I become a doctor? It became a question of more like, should I become a doctor? And once I realized that, I pretty much decided to stop and then recalibrate, meaning just decide like change what my current routine is, which is like everything med related, and then actually switch into deciding like, okay, if not medicine, then what could it be, you know? And then long story short, I decided to go into product design after a lot of research. I thought it would be like art director first of all, and then I tried some social media part-time jobs, and I was just like, no, that's not for me. And then that's when I discovered like product design. And then when I guess decided to go into it, I started self-teaching myself like all the different skills that's required of a product designer back in 2017. I think they're still the same now, but the skill set might be a little bit more specific now. And then how I taught myself was I pretty much just went into watching like a lot of YouTube videos or reading a lot of articles, and then really putting myself in the shoes of a product designer. And how my career kicked off was that I did like a redesign of Instagram at the time.
All right, you should definitely talk about that. I was telling a lot of people that how like doing the right case study for the right kind of purpose can actually unlock like a lot of job opportunities.
Yeah.
Potentially.
I'm trying to keep my story really short, so you guys should really let me know which part is interesting to you. But I did that redesign of Instagram, and it pretty much went kind of viral. It got over like 200,000 views. It got republished several times, and then I even got to talk to like the PM of Instagram during that time. And one of their product designer messaged me, was like, "Yo, your case study start a conversation there." And I was like, "Okay, that's lit." And then job offers started coming in, and I took my first job in Saigon, Vietnam. So I was living abroad for a couple of years. It was only like a year-ish ago that I moved back here, and now I'm at Evernote. I pretty much jumped to the end.
Yeah, you talk about your Saigon, or actually, we can just go through the questions too. But yeah, TLDR, self-taught, STEM to UX. Around the same time as me, and then you worked as the head of product actually at a.
So I pretty much the startup I work for is a travel experience company in Vietnam, and the CEO was the one who recruited me directly. And he's like, "Yo, like you can come to Vietnam and then become the second product designer for the company, and then reinvent the way that travel works for Vietnam and make Vietnam a leading inspiration for the other countries, like developing countries." And me being Vietnamese, I was like, that sounds like a great plan, like what better way to kick off the career than like in my home country, and doing something that I actually believe in. And
leveraging kind of that like cultural context as well to make up for any, I don't know, like hard design skills you might have not had at the time.
Yeah, but it's also like, I'm a big believer in doing what you believe in. When I got the job offers, a lot of the companies I was talking to, I didn't really vibe with. Vibe with as in, I don't really believe in their mission. Like I understand their product, but I can't see myself actually going there and designing their products. It just doesn't make, there was a disconnect,
Right,
and when the CEOs was like, you will get to play a part in making Vietnam like a model for other countries because of the way that he's approaching travel and the technology. And Saigon has become like such a big hub, you guys. Like like I'm a little bit sad to be in SF right now, thinking about Saigon because Saigon has the name like it's the Silicon Valley of Southeast Asia. That's how fast Saigon has grown in terms of product, technology, entrepreneurship. So leaving was a little bit sad, but I came in at a really good time there, you know.
So I think that actually segues pretty well into the first question. The top voted question is it worth it to go to startups earlier or later in your career?
I want to hear you answer this one first.
I feel like I've talked a lot about startups, but generally there's three types of there's echo. What do you think is a reason? How bad is the echo? Should we try without the Okay, I'm just gonna keep talking. If there's an echo or static on your end, somebody please speak up. But we'll try it with this mic. Anyways, like I was saying, there's kind of three types of companies you can work for as a designer. There's agency, startup, and corporate. And depending on what your goals are, the type of work you want to do and what skills you want to develop, some are better or worse than others. Generally at a startup, I feel like you get a lot more ownership than you would anywhere else. You get to design like an entire feature or even an entire product, which is insane for a junior designer. And as a result, you'll probably learn a lot of things that you can't do elsewhere. The kind of downside though is like the pay is usually a lot worse and there's no prestige, a lot of long hours, and you might not have a lot of guidance or mentorship. For agency, it's more like if you want to develop like a very specialist kind of role, although I wouldn't recommend it nowadays for people trying to get more into UX and product because you don't have a lot of attachment or ownership with the end result and like business metrics. And then corporations are really good if you want to climb that corporate ladder or optimize for money or optimize for job stability and mobility. But generally, I don't think you'll get a lot of exposure to new design skills. I usually recommend it as your second or third job. I don't know if that answers the first question. Do you have anything to add?
It's funny because Richard and I started out pretty much the same, you know, STEM and then went into product, but our route is pretty different, you know, in terms of what we did. I went to startup and then you went to
like mid-sized company. I guess Shopify is kind of corporate now.
Yeah.
And PlayStation is corporate too. So
yeah, so you've always been like around there, right? And then but you helped play with his company also, just like sorry. So I guess for me, I guess my answer is that I don't think it's a matter of when, you know, the question is about like when should you go into a startup? You know, I don't think it's a matter of when. I think it's a matter of what your needs are, like what are you trying to learn? And then it's also yeah, no, actually that's it. It's a matter of what you're trying to learn, like what you want right now. Because Richard was saying that startups can pay low, you know, and that's relatively true, but there's been more startups now that have greater funding and they can hire like, you know, hire a little bit more. But of course they're never going to pay like Facebook, right? So
the golden handcuffs, yes.
Yeah, so yes, so it's not when, because we both started at the same time going to design, right? And I went to a startup immediately and now I'm working for Evernote Corp. And then yeah, and we're both pretty relatively happy, you know. So
I think the TLDR is just like it really depends, which is kind of a cop-out answer, but I don't know if that gives you guys enough insights on the difference between agency, corporate, and startup. It just depends on what your goals are. If you want a lot of money and you want to climb corporate ladder, go corporate. If you want to learn a lot, do startup. If you want to develop very specialist skills and maybe have a bit more mentorship, agency is probably the way to go. But then it does fluctuate quite a bit depending on the specific company and also the place you work at. So hope that helps. Again, if anyone wants to have like follow-up questions or discuss this, feel free to like turn your video or even just your mic on because I feel like I'm talking to a wall right now. Okay, we can go on to the next question. Product design and startups. What are the red flags to look out for when evaluating a decision?
Oh, yeah. Let me take this one.
Yeah, go for
Okay.
it.
So I think for sure you want to look at the founders. You really want to evaluate the founders. It could be one, could two,
Mm,
but you want to know who is making the decision at the end of the day. Like, who are they as a person, or like, why did they start this company? What kind of culture are they trying to create? You really want to dig into the founder because they're the one that's going to set the foundation for your experience there, and then second, you want to look into their mission and purpose. Do you align with what they're trying to do? And then third, you want to look into, or there's one more. Third, I would say the most important from my lesson for working for a startup is that you want to make sure you look at their financials. That's super important because startup at the end of the day, they're working on a runway. If they have like funding, they will have kind of like a runway to go with. And then you want to make sure that they have enough money to pay you.
right.
They have enough money to tackle the milestones they want to have for the next months, years, so forth. So you need to look into their financials. I was having a conversation with the CEO of a startup the other day who was trying to recruit me.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I want to see your financials. And he just pulled up his spreadsheet and he went through and told me what funding
Yeah,
he
that's
got.
very important.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, and how are you guys spending that? And what are your plans? These are the things that you want to know from a startup because the way they handle their money is so important for success. And then I guess one other thing to look for is something that you were saying earlier. There might not be mentorship
Yeah,
there.
you're usually gonna be like the first or only designer, even as a
Mhm.
junior, which could be hard, but I do believe everyone can self-learn.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And again, it's not a good or bad thing. It becomes good or bad depending on how you take it. For me, I became the second product designer there, and I did so much work, but I really enjoyed having ownership and having a say in the strategy and everything, you know.
Hmm.
But it can become bad if you're someone who needs more structure, more, yeah, I would say just more structure.
Yeah, I think I'll also say like don't have any delusions about becoming rich from a startup. Treat the stock or equity you get as worthless. Like don't even factor that into your compensation. It's literally like a lottery ticket.
Mhm.
Like if you want like an idea of scale or your chances, like roll like 100-sided dice or like do 100, like 0 to 100 random number generator. Like 1 to like 94 means like your stock's worthless. 95 to 98 is like if like buying a car essentially, and then like there's only like really a 1% chance your stock's gonna be worth anything. So don't treat that as a factor.
Yeah. So let me just take the question from Ahmed. Is that how you say it? I don't want to butcher your name, Ahmed. Um, how to risk of failure. So that was something I wish I would have asked sooner. Was how was first of all, how was the team built? For accounting finances, because the problem with like the startup I was working for, the name is Christina's. So what happened was when I joined, the company was doing very well for itself. A lot of funding, really great. But then somewhere along the way, like about a year that I was into it, things started to go a little bit south with the finances because the company was spending money too fast. So that's something to keep account of, like keep into consideration. You can ask all the questions that you can ask when like sussing out if that startup's for you, if their financial health is good. But you also want to pay attention, like when you're there, when the company starts spending a lot of money, like hiring really fast, and expanding to multiple locations, and doing XYZ, that when their expenses is just going really high, you want to ask the questions, because that is a sign that the company is growing really fast. And if they're growing really fast, that's a great thing. But it's not a great thing if they cannot manage their expenses,
Yeah.
right? Because a sign of growth is when you're starting to hire more and you're starting to expand,
Yeah,
but
healthy startups should be growing
growing.
like I think 50 to 100% per year,
Mhm.
unless they have like a very specific reason not to.
Mm-hmm.
So like honestly, every time I would consider a startup, I go to Crunchbase and I look up their finances, like who funded them, like how much they raised, when was the last time they raised, what their burn rate is. There's a lot of stuff you can check. So startups are usually like I think pretty risky, but if you're just trying to gather a lot of experience early on, then I think it could be worth it. But
Yeah.
you have to go into it with the right mindset. So perfect transition. So next question is, how do you protect yourself from being exploited versus wearing many hats and trying to learn new things? I have an answer for this, but do you want to take it or?
Yeah, I think it depends on how you think of exploitation. You know, um, exploitation can mean like you're not making money at all. And you're just, when you're like a photographer and they're like, oh, can you take my photos for exposure? I
Yeah.
think that's exploitation. You know, um, but to answer this question, it goes down to transparency. If they start recruiting you or you're applying for a startup, there should be a conversation on the responsibilities, right? You need to ask, what do you expect me to do while I'm there? Like how are the work divided? What is my role?
Yeah.
And if they start off saying, oh, you're just going to do this, and then it grow bigger, then that's probably a problem. But if they straight up tell you, you're going to be coming here and you're going to be like one of our first hire and you're going to be doing a lot of work, then I don't really think that's really
Um,
exploitation anymore.
so like I feel like I have a slightly different answer. So TLDR, like businesses don't really care about you.
Mm-hmm.
So like if you're doing like a lot of grunt work that nobody else is helping you with, and you're not learning anything from it, I would really push back. But they're giving you a lot of work that's like cross-disciplinary. Like maybe they're telling you to do some marketing, telling you to do some like content writing. I
Mm-hmm.
actually see that as like very valuable. And like one of the major reasons to go to a startup is to wear many hats because good designers are very well rounded and they have like a lot of that context with like adjacent fields. Um, so I think like every time I'm asked to do something now, like I'm like, what can I learn from this? If I can't learn anything, I try and delegate it away or push back.
Mm-hmm.
Although like there's always like kind of like a fine line in how you deliver that message.
Mm-hmm. Now you definitely want to ask, like, is there somebody else who can do it? Like that's better than me? Like why
Yeah,
me?
yeah.
Right?
A good policy that one of my old managers had was like anytime like anyone has to do grunt work, we all do it together. We just like order a pizza, stay up at night, and then like when while working at Shopify, I was working on a logo maker app, and we had to upload like 1,000 logos, and then like technically that would be like either my job or the PM's job, but like we just like ordered pizza and just like pulled an all nighter and did it together, and that didn't feel as bad as like if they had just been like, hey, like you need to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's clearly grunt work, right? So I think it's like distinguishing between learning opportunities and grunt work is the
Yeah.
key. I think Ahmed already asked this, but it was like, how do you overcome the fear of failure? Did you touch on this already or?
No, you can take this one.
Um, so I feel like failure has like a very weird connotation because it's like a concept from school, right? You don't really fail in real life. Like you can fail a test because is that too cheesy? That's what I believe
No,
though.
that's a
Like
good one.
you literally like in school for the first like 23 years, you're like, here's a thing, you study it, you pass or fail, and then there's no redos, right? That's not really how it works in real life. Like in design, you're never gonna get the right answer immediately, no matter how much context or experience you have. You need to be okay with like moving past failure because that's just part of the process. Even the most senior designers will like make a bad call and fail. Um, so like it's about like reframing things, right? It's not like you failed. It's like, what did I learn from this and how do I improve next time, right? If it takes you like 10 times to do something until you get it right, like that's a cost of doing things. And hopefully next time it doesn't take as many times. And that's how you grow as a designer. I'd even argue that like you grow faster if you fail a lot. Like that's literally a startup thing, right? Like
Fail
fail
fast.
fast, fail fast, yeah. So don't see it as like a black and white kind of like thing that like just happens to you and you can't like there's really nothing to overcome, right? It's like a process.
Yeah, it's a process that you need to find meaning in. Like,
Yeah.
you need to find meaning on what happened and what can you learn from it. Like Richard said, is failure is something that you should embrace. It's part of what makes us feel a little bit human. If you just succeed all the time, like, I don't think you will feel those little joys.
Yeah.
you know
Cool. So moving down the question list, if you guys have any follow-up comments or questions, if you want us to elaborate or be more specific, please let us know. You don't have to unmute if you really don't want to. You can type into the chat. Don't know why everyone's too shy today, but we'll just keep going otherwise. All right, so the next question is, what are the major drawbacks after taking the leap into UX?
I have a hard time answering this one.
Oh, I have like I can tell you like realities of the job, but like, there's always gonna be like pros and cons in every job. And I think one of the drawbacks in UX is like any tech job, everything moves so quickly. And like I feel like not only do you spend 40 hours a week like working, like you need to spend like a lot of extra time like learning and keeping up to date with industry trends. Ideally, you can do that during the job, but for me personally, and this is probably because I'm a workaholic, but like I feel like I'm never done work because even when I'm done like the work, I'm like, oh, like I need to read this article, I need to like try out this new tool, I need to like look into these like insights. Um, but there's definitely like designers out there with good work-life balance. So I don't know. Like I don't think there's anything. I would actually argue like design is one of the best jobs to have. Like in 2016 or 2017, it was rated highest job satisfaction. I don't know what it is now, but I would assume that's still in the top 10.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really think there is a drawback if it's something that you decided that you wanted to do and commit to. Because like Richard said, there's drawbacks or not. There's pros and cons for every job. I don't. I don't really call it a drawback. I feel like if you're calling it a drawback, it's because you kind of regret going into it. So if you decide to make the jump, I would have assumed that you did some due diligence. You looked into what the job asks of you. What is the day to day of a product designer. Um, you know, is this really what you want to spend your day doing? Problem solving and sometimes pushing pixels,
Hmm.
sometimes research, sometimes testing. If this is something that you enjoy, then UX is gonna feel great. But with everything in life, if you start jumping into something that you are, that you're kind of like unsure or don't really like, and you're doing it for XYZ, that's not really a great reason at the end of the day, then it's gonna feel like a chore,
I will say though, like design is so different at every company, even within teams and products. Like just because you don't like your job doesn't mean like UX isn't for you. It might just be like there's like a different type of design that you like that still falls within UX.
Yeah.
Like for me, like when I was designing ads, I hated my life, and it was basically like performance design, right? And I realized my passion was actually in growth design, and I started liking my work a lot more. I also know people that started off as a designer and then realized they actually wants to be a researcher or a PM. That's very common as well. So that's like another value of startups, right? You get to try like all the roles and see what exactly you do like. Whereas if you go into agency or corporate, you're kind of shuttled into what's that called, like a pigeonhole or something.
Yeah.
Like you're doing something very specific, right? And it's very repetitive, so you might not really like that.
Yeah. So on that note, it's a matter of kind of being self-aware as a designer, right? Like, what part of the process do you enjoy doing? For me, I really enjoy the research and data part. And that's something I do a lot, like at Evernote. So you kind of have to understand which part of the process do you gravitate to, or which part of design you gravitate to. Some people might prefer animation,
Yep.
interaction, and if that's something that you like more, then maybe you can specialize.
Yeah. I'm just gonna answer Andy's question again real quick. I touched on this earlier on, but agencies, you're basically going to be a specialist, usually on visual design or interaction sometimes, and you'll usually have a lot of senior mentorship, but like the scope of your work is extremely narrow. You have essentially zero ownership over the product direction, and you don't really get to see your product through. So you would develop essentially zero product thinking skills, which I think are actually really important if you want to move up in your career, because eventually all paths in tech lead to product leadership. So that's my 2 cents there. like I know some people that like, will do an agency for like 1 or 2 years if there's like a very specific skill. Usually outside of the big three that they really want like in-depth practice on. Usually that's going to be like animation, I find. Animation or branding are very common. If you wanted to like, do like almost like a paid boot camp in those, like I would go to an agency for those, but only after you've established kind of like some proficiency in like visual interaction, product thinking, and worked at a couple bigger companies already.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, something you mentioned was like you don't get to see your product through, you know. So
Hmm.
there's a pro and con to that. You don't get to see it through because you're always working on new projects. You
Yep.
think it gets it if you thrive on that because there's you like seeing or working on different things, you know, and you're gonna get a lot of that agency.
Hmm.
You're gonna instead of working on like one productivity app for like the whole time you're there, you're working on fitness, AR or whatever, all the different depending on who the clients are, but then you don't actually get to see it through to production. You don't get to iterate on it, you don't get to improve on it, you know,
Hmm.
you don't get to feel like you have like stake in the product.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I'm going to pause and answer Drasty's question because I think it's actually a really good one. So, what does a PM position look like for designers? So, essentially, when you start from like junior to intermediate, you're kind of more of like an executioner, like very heavy on visual and interaction design. As soon as you hit senior, something happens. You start being involved a lot in strategy and products. And at a lot of companies, there's something called like senior designer archetypes. So that's when you kind of like develop your own specializations. And one of the archetypes that's very, very sought after is the designer PM hybrid.
Mm.
And it's not actually like an official role or title, it's just like an archetype to describe your skill set and your interests and your curiosities. And those designers usually end up doing very well and going to leadership or founding their own companies. If you actually want to become like a legitimate PM, you can. I think the transition from design to PM is easier than engineering to PM. But personally, like unless you really, really never want to design anymore and you just want to do product, I would just try and get to senior first and then just take on as many PM responsibilities as possible. At a lot of my previous roles, like I was the designer and the PM, and that's actually quite common. So you can always do a hybrid role that way.
Mm.
Just looking at a few more questions here.
What do you think make a successful PM though?
Most PMs are horrible, in my opinion. A good PM makes the lives of the engineers and designers easier and allows them to focus on just the craft. And a lot of it depends on the company, right? Like if you're at a startup, the PM should be kind of like defining the roadmap, paving the way, getting you all the resources and context that you need, and then also defining business cases and making sure the rest of the company's aligned with your goals and your goals are kind of laddering up to the company's goals. I guess it's the same thing for a corporation, but you're spending the majority of your time on getting alignment because typically you're working on projects with like a lot of other overlap with other teams. Like I've worked on this project where I literally had to align with 10 teams and there was no PM on my team and I was literally in meetings all day and I hated it, which is why like, I don't think I'd want to be like a pure PM. But I don't know if that answers your question, Drasty, but hope that helps. Feel free to follow up if that's not clear. And then just a quick answer for Lauren. When is a startup not a startup anymore? I feel like the lines are pretty blurred, but I say like after Series C and after you hit like 100+ employees, you might still be considered a startup on paper, but that's like the tipping point of when you shift into more of a corporation, even if you haven't IPO'd yet. But I think like the sweet spot is a mid-sized company where you have like, let's say 100 to 500 employees and under 50 designers.
Yep.
And no, PMs do not need programming knowledge, neither do designers. You just need a very high level understanding of like how stuff is implemented both on the design and engineering
Yeah,
side.
I'll add something that you don't need programming knowledge, as in I mean, your job is a PM, not an engineer, right? You don't want
Hmm.
you're not there to code. You're there to help people collaborate and push the product through to development, right? Set a mission, get everyone to work together and then ship the product. So you do not need programming knowledge, but you should know how to speak to an engineer,
Yeah.
right? You don't need like design knowledge, but you should know right now what is working for different products and stuff like that. So you want to be like have a domain knowledge of different areas, but you're not the person who's supposed to be doing that work, right?
Yeah. So next question, and this is from Amanda, and also one of the top voted questions is, how did you leverage your science background as a career switcher? I can tee this off and hand it to you, or do you have a deep answer you want to go into?
It's not that deep.
Okay. Okay. So like, I'm a big advocate of context as a skill set, whether it be industry context, cultural context, domain context. And also kind of like recognizing what transferable skills you have. Design is such a broad, vast, multidisciplinary field that, there's no way you can't have anything transfer over. Like I studied kinesiology in university. Like I studied bones and muscles, right? Like I was like, this is not going to have any application. Kim studied psychology, so she had a ton of overlap. But for me, I was like, all right, bones and muscles, what can I do with this, right? So obviously I could have gone into like, human factors, ergonomics design. I could have gone to industrial design. I could have designed stuff related to like fitness or hardware like that required like physical inputs. Although I was like so done with biomechanics at that point, I didn't want to do anymore. So like the skills that did transfer a lot was actually research and data. Believe it or not, like the overlap between scientific research and user research is actually, I'd say, pretty significant. Like we use like similar tools, we just call them different things. Um, like questionnaires are still super common user research. When you're doing a user test, it's very similar for how you would conduct like a scientific study. Um, and also just like understanding of data as well. You would be surprised how many designers can't understand or look at a graph without interpreting the results and making a hypothesis. Even like the scientific method is a huge boon for designers. At least for me, like I always structure like all my work and like, all right, like what is the design hypothesis here? How do we make it testable? And how do we know it worked? I found that that's a unique kind of like approach that like all pre-med or like pre-science designers tend to use. And it usually makes them very good at like analytical kind of work. So, growth design, performance design, your background to be really good there. And then obviously if you wanted to work for any like science company, like, I don't know, like 23andMe or something, you would have like a lot of domain background and context that would transfer over. Do you want to add some thoughts?
Yeah, so like Richard said, I did like pre-med, but I majored in psychology. In hindsight, there was, even though I knew logically, especially from doing research, that I can apply a lot of the the things I learned in psychology into design, but it was kind of like that's still that self-doubt, right? Like but then you don't, right? But I guess what we're trying to say is you can totally transfer it over. A lot of the work that I did when I was a psych major, I'm still able to like talk about now, like things that are related to like behavioral and stuff like that. And even if you're like in finance or business and you're trying to transfer over to design, a lot of that is also transferable because you can now communicate and understand like the business behind it, and then be able to like communicate to leadership or to the PM and stuff better. Especially if you do like growth design, you should understand like some of the metrics you're trying to move, right? So I think just to touch into what Richard was or tie together is that design touches everything, and therefore whatever you're doing right now will most likely be transferable. It's just a matter of how you relate them together. If you are stuck on thinking this is that and this one's over here, then they will never come together. Right?
Yeah.
And something you said that was really important is that design is starting to become the kind of work that every industry needs to pay attention to, right? So that means if you were someone who really found joy in medicine, but then you didn't actually want to do it, you will probably be able to find a company that has some kind of like mission that you like and you can actually help design with. Or if you were in finance or law or anything, you know, you can probably find a job
Yeah.
that ties back to that field
Yeah.
because design touches everything, you know.
And then just like one last point is like, you don't start your design career at zero, no matter what your background is. There's always something that you can leverage, whether it be like targeting companies within a specific domain or industry, or figuring out like what transferable skills are in like design, or like leveraging your context as like a unique skill set. So just like figure out what those are and target like specific companies that would value those
Yeah,
instead of just trying to apply generically or broadly.
you don't want to do that.
Yeah, definitely not. Yeah, shameless plug for my newsletter, which I talked about like all of these things in much more detail. Okay, cool. The next question is, what are some of the common pitfalls that junior designers fall into?
I think the first one I can think of
We'll answer that one next.
is just jumping. It, I think it's just jumping into it too fast. You know, sometimes you get really excited and you see a problem, you start designing. You know, you don't
Yeah.
really ask all the questions that you need to ask or look at all the tools that you could be using to
Yeah.
get the answer. You know, like sometimes you just want to start opening that design file, you know, and then drawing or mocking up all of different solutions when you haven't really understood the root of it.
Yeah. I think another big one is kind of being married to your design. Like
That's a good
design
one.
is like a very iterative process and it's not going to be linear. You don't go from like wireframe to mid-fi to hi-fi to prototype to shipping. There's a lot of kind of iteration back and forth, etc. And validation that you need to do along the way. I think like a subset of that is like a lot of like junior designers tends to be very defensive about their work. It might be like a confidence thing. It might be like, just kind of having that art mindset or like it feels like a personal attack. The thing about design is that everyone's going to have an opinion on design, right? Nobody's going to have an opinion on how code is implemented aside from engineers, right? But everyone can look at a design and have an opinion. Usually it's on color, usually it's on make the logo bigger, make it pop, like that's obviously really bad advice. And a bad designer or a junior designer would be really defensive and start dismissing feedback. But feedback truly is a gift. And like the best way to kind of, improve like your standing within your team and kind of move to that senior level is if you can like educate your team on how to give good feedback and actually apply it earnestly. Easier said than done. It's actually very hard to do that, especially with like all different types of personalities out there and like how you explain the value of it. One more note would be kind of like when you design something, you need to have like a reason for it. A lot of people design something just to make it look pretty. When you make any change at all or you make any design decision, you need to have a hypothesis, right? Like if I design it this way, if I add something here, if I remove this here, if I rearrange it there, like something needs to change. Does that make sense? Okay. Do you have anything else you want to add?
These are two big ones.
Yeah,
These
yeah.
kind of really set your foundation. You, especially as a junior designer, you're going to continue working in the career and you're going to be building network and all that stuff. You don't want to become known as the designer that don't know how to take feedback or
Yeah.
be able to work with other people. These are two very, besides the technical skills that you need to have,
Mhm.
you need to be the kind of designer that people want to work with,
Yeah.
know, because you're going to need like buy-ins from
Yeah.
so many people. So if you're not able to communicate your ideas or be able to like explain why you went with that solution, that's going to be a problem
Yeah,
as you move forward.
I feel like I keep saying this, but like when I started off in design, I thought technical skills were the most important. I thought design was a technical role. Like it is technical, but like the bar for technical design skills is much lower than you think. It's more about like how specific your technical skills match the type of work you're doing. The one skill that transfers over that trumps above all is literally communication. Like you need to be really good at communicating. Like every time you have an opportunity to present your work, to speak in meetings, to present anything or talk to anyone, you should use it as a way to kind of practice your communication skills. One thing that I started doing 2 years ago that helped tremendously is um, 5 minutes before every meeting, if there's a chance I might speak, I write down like, all right, this is the main points I want to convey, and this is the ideal outcome that can be created with my words. And I would try and hit that as close as possible. And after the meeting, I write like, oh, did it work? Yes or no? And then write a reflection and then kind of iterate from there. I don't know if that's like a,
Yeah, and I
yeah,
think the second most valuable skill would probably be collaboration. I like to
which is
me.
like also kind of
Yeah,
communication.
but you need to actually be able to align people, like other people, on what you're trying to do. You know, so it ties like together. So communication, collaboration, the two C's. Is there like another C that we need?
No, I think that's it. All right, answer some other questions here. This one's from Peja. Let me know if I pronounce that wrong, but um, how did your design confidence change over time from junior to where you are now? Especially if you're starting out as a solo designer or lacking mentorship or startups in smaller companies. Do you have an answer?
I think it has to do with experience. Like
That's not a helpful answer though.
sorry,
Uh,
but pretty much like what my point is, like as you're starting out, you're gonna have a lot of doubts on your solution, even if it's grounded in some kind of research, but as you get more experience, you get to like, hey, when I did XYZ back then, it worked out well, so it'll probably be like transferable like
Yeah,
now.
I can give you two data points for when I was like, I'm sure I overcome the imposter syndrome. The first one was shipping a real product to real people and seeing people like it, which may come earlier or later in your career, but it's definitely possible to do on your own as well. The second one is, and again, this is like the best way to learn, have a mentor, have a peer, and have a mentee, like somebody that knows less than you. And then as you kind of teach that mentee, somebody that knows less than you, no matter how experienced you are, there's always somebody less experienced. You're going to kind of see a lot of things click. And as you explain them, you're going to realize how much you know, which is deceptively more than you think because design's so broad, but once you're able to connect it, when you articulate your answers and explanations to somebody more junior than you, then it feels like that knowledge is consolidated and you do enough of that over time. You're going to develop the confidence to do that. And also as a bonus, you improve your communication skills and you're better able to like back up and defend and articulate your design decisions at work.
Yeah, and I feel like if you are not able to get a gauge of it, then as you start to move on to your career, you really want to document like your work. Once you
Yep.
start documenting your work, you get to document your impact, the metrics.
Yeah.
Like sometimes as a designer, we need to see like the visual aspect of it, seeing like it in front of us. So if you're able to say like I did this project or I did this feature or XYZ and it led to this, it really builds your confidence when you are
Yeah.
able to see the tangible results for it.
Yeah, you want to create something called a brag document that Ahmed just mentioned. If you Google it, it'll be there. If you check out my last newsletter, I'll link the resource to it
Yeah.
as
There's a new
well.
product called Hype Docs, which is
Oh
like,
yeah.
you heard of it? Yeah, it's kind of
um,
similar.
yeah, like every time you work on anything, like track the metric before and after and log it and be like, as a result of my design, I moved this metric from this to this, resulting in either this much growth or this much revenue or profit. Notion Kim is the best.
Huh? Oh.
Um, okay. So Bai asked a question about growth design. I'm not going to answer this because I'm literally publishing an article explaining what growth design is in 2 days.
Give them a preview.
If you send me a message on Facebook, I'll send you the draft and you can read it in advance. Okay, Drasty's question is, in an interview setting, what is the best way to take criticism? Do you want to take this one?
Oh, well, first you want to acknowledge like the criticism, you want to reframe it back, and then you want to pretty much like ask more questions about it, but not in a defensive way. You want to seem like you're trying to understand like where the criticism is coming from. You want to acknowledge it, ask about it, and then reframe it back.
Yeah, and this is something that I realized early in my career. Even if you don't agree, you can say thank you for your feedback. I will consider it, and then don't consider it. They won't remember.
Tell me you're a designer without telling me you're a designer. That's great feedback. Let me try it out and see.
Yeah, essentially, like you don't have to get into a heated argument, okay? Like everyone's gonna give you like there's good feedback, bad feedback, there's feedback you agree with, and feedback you don't agree with. You need to take all of it gracefully and then be able to like filter out the signal from the noise, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it goes back to understanding, right? Like maybe
Yeah.
you like, to be honest, like if you don't understand where they're coming from and why it's being said, sometimes you can take it negatively when it wasn't meant to be taken negatively.
Yeah, it's like kind of leave your ego at the door, like you're not this like omniscient God that's gonna account for every edge case, every detail. Like you need other people to help catch these mistakes for you. So you need to take it gracefully. You need to be seen as somebody that can take feedback. Of course, if people give you really bad feedback, you need to educate them on how to give better feedback, right? And if they give you like kind of like rude feedback or negative feedback, just poker face it and say like, oh, can you be more specific, and try and like tease out like exactly what their issue is. One thing that also helps is kind of like adjusting your design to the fidelity that is best for the type of feedback that you want. Like if you want feedback on interaction design or information architecture, you shouldn't be showing hi-fi mockups. If you want feedback on content, then you should obviously use real content. If you want feedback on like layout and stuff, then maybe you do need to show a hi-fi. If you like, there's actually a really really good article on Medium called the 5 dimensions of prototype fidelity. Look that up, or I'll post it in the group after, and then kind of like gauge like what level of fidelity in each category do you need to get the type of feedback that you want, and that's like half the battle right there.
Yep. I think for me, it's always been better is just to ask more questions, because sometimes you get this feedback and you feel a bit hurt about it,
Yeah.
and sometimes they didn't really mean it the way that they said it. Some people are not the best communicators,
Yeah.
and that's why you want to help them by asking questions and getting deeper into it.
Okay, let's through a couple more questions here.
Turn on the light.
Sure. Oh, this is a good one. What's one thing that helped you the most in landing your first design job and then going from junior to senior? This is like a two-parter here.
You want to do the first one part, landing your design job?
I feel like I already talked about this enough, so maybe we should just go to B, going from junior to senior.
Yeah, you want to take that one, Mr. Lead at Facebook?
Okay, I used to have like a lot of delusions on like how to get to senior, because like it was like one of my big life goals for the first like couple years. I will tell you, the amount of effort you put in has such little impact on whether or not you get promoted. I will say the majority of it's luck, but the type of luck that you want to optimize for is prepared luck. So you obviously need to have solid design skills. You need to have very strong communication skills. You need a rapport within the company. Like a lot of people need to know who you are and what you work on and why it's impactful. You need to be presenting your work to as many stakeholders as possible. Always volunteer to share your work and be involved in product strategy and leadership as much as possible. Like have opinions on everything, have hypotheses. The amount of work you put in is actually like not a big factor. A lot of it's just like luck in terms of like the projects you get to work on, how well the projects do, and how much your manager likes you, which is unfortunately like the reality of how things are. That being said, the easiest way to actually get promoted to senior is to up level when you switch companies.
Yeah.
So if you feel like you've been intermediate for over a year and a half, even 2 years, that's probably a good time to try and get up leveled somewhere else if you don't see a lot of growth opportunities internally.
Yeah. That being said, you can't ask for like expect something when you never asked for it. Like, yeah, your managers are supposed to be looking out for you at every stage and getting you that promotion. But some, people are always looking out for themselves, right?
Yeah.
So you really,
this is where the brag document
Yeah.
is so helpful. Like, start documenting every single win. Every time somebody says something nice about you, take a screenshot and put it into that document. Every time you led something, put it in your document. Like, this is not the time to be humble. Like, you need your accomplishments, like, very, very specific, undisputed, documented. Share with your manager before every promotion cycle and let your intentions be known.
Yeah.
Some people are very shy about wanting to get promoted. Like, I say in the first one-on-one, I'm like, I want to get promoted, what I need to do.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. So you want to make sure that it's documented, but you need to make sure your intentions are clear and develop a plan with your manager. So you can't expect them to want the best for you and know where you want to be if you never set it. Expectations.
All right, next question. I don't really get this one, but is the freedom of choice and design a good or bad thing?
Is Andy here?
I think Andy is here. Andy, do you want to elaborate on your question? Is the freedom of choice / design a good or bad thing / feeling?
He's typing.
Maybe he's typing. We'll give him a few seconds, or we can jump back to this afterwards. I feel like you have a good answer for this. How do you deal with work burnout?
Oh, okay. So 2 things, or maybe 3 things. One is you want to be very kind to yourself. I think we all have these expectations of ourselves to be like a freaking like Superman, like be able to do everything. But you need to understand that you're just one person, right? And you have like all these responsibilities, and just living, I feel like, is already like a goal in itself. So you want to be kind to yourself on your bad days and then celebrate the wins. Second is that you need to have something more to you than your work. I feel like sometimes people can be too invested into their work and not into the other areas of your life. It's like different buckets of your life, right? You have your friends, your family, your work, and then your hobbies. You want to make sure those buckets are kind of like equal-ish. Like some could be a little bit more filled if that's something like you are really passionate about, but you don't want your work bucket to be like this much filled, and then your friends, family, and hobbies buckets are like down here. Now there's kind of like an imbalance. So you want to like recalibrate, reevaluate, and understand where those buckets are in the levels. And that means like sometimes if your hobby bucket is like really low, you should look into finding other hobbies, right? Look into doing other things. Like for me, besides Evernote, I'm working on my startup Noted, and sometimes like you saw me today just practicing on my guitar.
Yes.
Badly.
Yes, have hobbies, because I don't have hobbies. All my hobbies are related to design, work, and career, which leads to a lot of burnout for me, actually.
Yeah, and then the third thing is you really want to have an outlet, right? And I tell Richard all the time, but journaling is so important. Sometimes you get so stuck in your head, like you're like, sometimes you're the worst version of yourself on certain days because you're just shit talking on yourself the entire day. Like, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you say that? And sometimes the only way to get out of your head is by putting it on paper. That's one of like the best thing that I ever picked up from my 27, putting it out there, years of age, was journaling. That was how I knew I needed to switch. That was how I knew I needed to take this offer versus the other offer. That's how I knew I was burnt out, So you want to have an outlet, you want to check your buckets, every now and then, maybe like it goes hand in hand. The way I check my bucket is by journaling, so it's those things.
I think the point is like, have other areas of your life that fulfill you that you can alternate on, because luck is such a big factor in like how fast you progress at work and the impact, not the impact, but like your tangible like achievements is based a lot on luck, if you're solely dependent on something that's essentially luck to bring you happiness and fulfillment, then you get burned out when like things don't go your way.
Yeah.
Like from my experience, every time I've been burnt out was when I really wanted to have like a career goal or milestone, and no matter how hard I worked, I couldn't get there. And then I was like, oh, what am I even doing? Like, I'm so tired. Like, why am I doing this? But once I was able to find like other non-work things that brought me fulfillment, I wasn't burnt out as much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And part of it, you just really need to be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're just too hard on ourselves, and it doesn't make the situation any better. You know.
Yeah. Cool. So Andy re-articulating this question, and maybe we'll do this and one last one. Is it better to be given more space to try things out when you're new and risk failure, or have a bit more structure or objectives so you can have successes and model yourself after it?
Still wrapping myself like
Um,
around
I,
that
okay,
question.
I can kind of speak to this. So I think it depends on your personality, right? Like, if you're able to like course correct, like obviously you want like a lot of freedom. Like the big thing is like you need to know when you fail. Not as in like your boss yelling at you, but like you need to know why you failed and when you fail within a startup in order for you to improve, right? Giving yourself a lot of freedom and then just like building whatever you want and shipping whatever you want and not getting that feedback is not going to help you grow. So if you're the only designer at like a 3-person startup and you have executive design decisions over everything, that's going to be a horrible growth opportunity for you. Not saying that like any solo design role is bad, but you need like either data, research, or other people within the company to tell you when you're wrong. And that's the best way to learn. Conversely, if you're super constrained and you have a micromanager, that's obviously not going to be a good time either. I feel like the sweet spot's like somewhere in between, but it's skewed towards the type of person you are.
Yeah, this is a cop out answer, but it's about balance. You know, you can't have too much freedom. You can't have too much structure. It's really understanding where you're at.
Okay.
And sorry, and a big part of that is again journaling. You need to understand and be self-aware. You know, where do you lack? Where do you need to improve on, and so forth.
Okay. So we basically answered all our questions and we're over time, but does anyone have any last questions before we end the session? Going once, going twice. Okay, cool. So there are no questions. Well, anyways, thank you everyone for staying this whole time. Oh. How do you effectively communicate your design process in an interview? Do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I think when you are communicating your design process, you it's usually in a form of maybe a portfolio review or something. Depends on where you are in like the interview process. But you always want to address like the problem solving aspect of it, right? You kind of give a general. Usually, I give like a general overview, and then I'll give like an example because you want to pretty much communicate that your design process can change depending on what project that you're taking in. You know.
Yeah, I think just like the counterpoint side, it's like you're doing something wrong if your design process is exact same for every single project you work on, because
Yeah.
it means that you're just going through the motions. You're not choosing your tools and processes intentionally.
Yeah, and timeline. You need to like sometimes you need to communicate that because of this timeline for a project, like if a project is really short, you cannot do user research and testing for that project, right? So you need to be adaptable as a designer.
Yeah, so I think distilling it down to like two main takeaways is like always communicate your constraints of the project because that informs what you can and can't do. And the second is like have a reason for every step in your process, right? You don't have to go in order. You don't have to do like a checklist. It's more like I had this, I made this design decision, or like I had to validate this assumption using this tool because it had this impact on, like future design decisions, and kind of like explaining why you do things more than what you did, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I guess like since we're on the topic of like interview, one thing I'll add into that is usually when you're doing like a design interview, they will ask you to showcase like 1 to 3 projects, and if you have been working on certain projects, you might not know which project to present, and it's completely okay to ask the hiring manager or the recruiter like, what are you looking for? If you know what they're looking for, and they will definitely tell you, you can showcase the project that fits those bullets, like instead of showing like a case study that has more like a project that has more like interaction design. When they're looking for research, you can show a project that has more research and testing,
Mm-hmm.
so you really want to um, do the research on what kind of designer they're looking for, and ask their hiring manager and recruiter what they're looking for also, to communicate like the things that they're looking for.
Cool, thanks. So I'll just quickly answer Ahmed's question. The TLDR is this can be very, very, very hard to do. I think, sorry, his question is how do you target your audience for a very large tech company as Facebook? I think what he means is like, in my recommendation, I always say like leverage your domain and your context and create case studies with a specific end company in mind to try and get hired there as like your foot in the door. That generally refers to startups and mid-sized companies. It's going to be very difficult to do with big companies. Not saying it's impossible, because Kim's an example where her Instagram redesign led to a potential opportunity with Facebook. There's also this like Apple Music redesign that led to an Apple internship. But those are extremely rare. I think it's much easier for you to get your foot in the door with like more of a like small to mid-sized company first. Because generally like FANG companies and big mega corps, the scope is so broad that you can't really do any real targeting. Like your case has to be really, really good with a really solid business case.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Going to end the stream for tonight. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and have a good rest of the day.